Welcome to the Long Term. I'm Ty King, and on this podcast, we've been exploring all the many facets of recovery, starting with substance use, and we continuously come back to substance use after we found that there is a Venn diagram between the average human being and somebody that has an issue with substance use. There's usually something that they're both recovering from, right? Both involve recovery. So it's kind of important to see in this area of substance use recovery, what are some of the resources that are available? What has been the issue? How is that being solved? And what can we do for a future that is sustainable and healthy for all of us as a society, as a culture, as people, as human beings on this planet that are sharing this space to live on? And so it's always exciting to get to talk to the professionals that actually get to do this, from their stance and their point of view and their place in the world. So getting to learn from people who have practical experience versus reading it from a book or reading from one person's, literature that they've written, because that's their own personal, instance. And so being able to capture these, gather them up together, what are the commonalities? What have people have seen work? Without that further ado, I just want to go right into it and talk to Jesse Romo. Thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thanks so much, Ty. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, man. I really appreciate you coming on here and talking from your experience. And so you're a therapist specializing in trauma relationships and addiction at, is it Kinman & Co. or Kindman & Co.?
Kindman & Co.
Kindman & Co. in California. So it's really interesting to get that angle. I always love tackling what is the psychology here behind everything. I always tell people the greatest class I ever took was not in audio engineering or marketing or any of the self-help things or the college classes I took. It was a social psychology class that I took that helped me understand more about myself and other people and how we relate to each other and the motive behind what happens when we take action. So it's exciting to get to talk to you today. Jesse, give me a little bit about your history and where you are now with your position.
Yeah. Well, like you said, I'm a therapist. I'm an associate marriage and family therapist. I work at a group private practice in Highland Park called Kindman & Co. As you were giving your introduction and saying it's nice to talk to the professionals, I had this thought, I'm a professional. It's still, I've been doing this for a while, but it's weird to think of it in that way, especially when talking about addiction, because such a big part of what drew me to working in this field was my personal experience. So I think I'm kind of holding how my background is both educational and professional, where I studied this. I've been working in mental health and working as a therapist for about 3 years now, including my clinical training. And I also have a lot of lived experience in addiction and recovery, which I think informs how I work with people. That's kind of the general overview. I know I didn't share too much about either side of that, but I've been doing this work. I started working in mental health in 2020, had a career change at that time. I went back to school, finished my graduate program in clinical training in 2023. And I've been working in private practice since then, working with folks, primarily looking to work with folks who are navigating the relationship with trauma, questioning the relationship with substances or other addictive processes, and relationships. And I'm a relational therapist, which we can talk more about what that means and kind of my view on human psychology and things like addiction or other disorders. But that's a few general broad brushstrokes of who I am and what I'm bringing to our conversation.
Yeah, and that's incredibly interesting. Your background in having personal experience as what they call lived experience, right? Where you're, I'm really interested in hearing how you came from that to going into your career. And so I'd love to talk about your story from before. I think because when I heard that, most of the time when I'm meeting people who have found their career path, right? They're in, if they came through recovery successfully, Now they're a peer support specialist, or they are running a recovery house themselves, or they are on the front end of like getting legislature, passed on behalf, and then policy making and that type of stuff. And so being able to go into something like being a therapist, I don't think that a lot of people know that that's even an option for them, given their history, and being able to outwardly talk about it, much less.
Yeah, for sure. It's I do know a handful of some of my colleagues who are also therapists are in recovery. Um, a lot of therapists don't work in recovery. It's, a broad field so that we could work with different populations. But I think about in what you're saying, how a lot of people who work in recovery are in recovery, and how like in the recovery community, it's such a central part of your identity, being someone in long-term recovery. And that lived experience is so indispensable when it comes to, I don't know if indispensable is the best word, but it's so meaningful when you're working. I think of like the wisdom of 12 step and other like community focused models, that the lived experience is like the most important catalyst for building trust and a connection. Having someone who's walked the path before you, who truly understands what it's like. Um, as far as becoming a therapist, I didn't like envision myself when I got sober. I wasn't planning to become a therapist. When I got sober, I was just trying to get my life back together after everything fell apart, after I burned everything to the ground. And it was kind of a checkered path getting to this point. But yeah, I've seen people in recovery go so many ways, and this is one of them, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. And so was there ever like an incarceration or anything like that involved with your story beforehand?
Me, no, I was never incarcerated, despite possessing and traveling with many drugs. I think I was one of the lucky ones, driving under the influence, many points where it could have happened, and I got pretty lucky.
I'm always curious about that because I had a conversation this morning on another episode, where we were talking about, how I've asked so many people that have gone through recovery, what do you look for whenever you're going to apply for a job, right? Whenever you're picking a career, and then even if you go back to college, you get your degree, like how do you select who your employer is, right? And one of the main things is that, there's still that checkbox you have to take. Well, have you ever been convicted of a felony crime? And that's the brick wall for a lot of people.
Yeah.
But I've also heard from other people where it's, yes, I want to be accepted where in the workplace. Yeah. But also I want to have a place where I can be held accountable, where I know that I have boundaries that are set in place that, help me on my track, and I'm not, encountering very many activators or triggers, whatever you want to call them. Like I can handle what I'm trying to walk out, which is my recovery while I'm still at work, which is pretty incredible. And so, from your position, being able to take your past and which is informing how you're working with your clients, and then I'm sure that it helps you in return in some way.
Yeah, it does. In hearing you talk, I think about how lucky I am that when I said I burned my life to the ground, there were a lot of ways where that was the case, but I also think about things like incarceration, having a criminal record, how practically speaking, when we think about recovery, it's a lot bigger than just stopping drinking or stopping using drugs, right? It's about like building a life that is solid and stable and meaningful. It's about building connection and community. And our legal system and criminal punishment system makes it very difficult for people who have been incarcerated to be able to build that. Um, so I think I've been very lucky in that regard. Uh, I definitely burned my life down in other ways, and that shape and being able to repair that in sobriety has definitely shaped how I view this work, how I view. You talked about that Venn diagram at the beginning of like all humans, and then people specifically recovering from substance. And there's this overlap where um, I don't know if the line between addicts and non-addicts is so clear. There is something about the journey of recovery that I think has a universal element if we really zoom out and look at the human condition. But it's kind of a tangential answer, but that's what came to
Not
mind.
at all. No, your own brand. Because I think I've found, yeah, my own self-discovery. I came into this knowing nothing, right? So I don't have lived experience, and just trying to learn, what is recovery? What is it about? Why do we need this thing? Because I've seen why we needed it, but I wanted to create a platform where we could have these conversations and talk about it and help educate the public on why is it that we need recovery? Why is this beneficial for everyone? Even if you think that you don't have anybody in your life that has some sort of substance use issue or addiction, you probably do, for one.
Hmm. Yeah.
But also, uh, the most successful people like yourself, who have gone through recovery and then they make something of themselves, they're usually a pillar of a community, and you would never know that they ever had an issue unless they outright just told you. And so that's why it's important, because the ones that are successfully going through, they're your therapist.
Yeah.
You know, they may be somebody that you work very closely with, that you trust a whole lot, and mean a whole lot to you and your community, but you would never know. And so I think that's why I'm really interested in learning how when somebody comes to you and they start a session with you, this is their first time going through, and being, non-specific on, individual cases or anything, but talking in generalities. When somebody tells you that they've had a substance use issue and they're trying to, be in a headspace of recovery and live that and walk it out every day, what do you do for them? Do you start walking them through steps, or is there a go-to sort of plan that you give them?
I think it really starts with meeting someone where they're at. As we were talking about, you talk about that Venn diagram, and how I said addiction, I don't think is like a black and white addict and non-addict. I think there's so many ways that that tendency shows up, because the way I understand addiction is that it's more of an adaptation to suffering than it is like a disease or dysfunction. There are definitely a lot of models of addiction that have come into public discourse, especially over the last like 100 years. It's changed so much. Thinking of like at the time when AA was started, for example, in the 1930s. And back then, there's really no concept of addiction other than that it's a form of psychosis and insanity, um, or a moral failing and sin. But looking at where we are now, thinking of addiction as a spectrum, where there are many places along this spectrum that people could fall. It really, for me, starts with like meeting someone where they're at with curiosity. I don't have a plan or agenda or even like an ideal outcome. I think that's really about what that person is seeking. Um, but thinking about addiction as an adaptation, as like a survival strategy that has stopped working or is in the process of stopping to work, I start to get curious about those questions, understanding what role this has played in someone's life. Um, I go back to like the first time that I got drunk, and how for me, this was a profound experience. And I think there are many different versions of this, but often for people who develop a problematic relationship with drugs or alcohol, there's this notion that it did something for us, that drugs and alcohol were not a problem. They were an answer, they were a solution. And this was something that I experienced very profoundly I was like 13 years old when I got really drunk the first time, uh, and felt it. It felt magical. It felt, I don't think I would have called it like spiritual at the time, but it was this kind of profound experience. Um, like I said, I think there are many versions of that. For some people, it might feel more numbing or chaotic, but there's something that it does for us that we latch onto that we can't do through our own resources or through the things in our like immediate surroundings. And so we come to depend on it. It does something for us, and over time that stops working. So I always get curious about that if I'm working with somebody new. Another thing that I would want to add to that is that this applies to any therapeutic work. I believe so much of healing is relational, and so much of the task of therapy is about building a strong therapeutic relationship. There's research showing that the most impactful factor in therapy success is having a strong therapeutic alliance. And I've seen that firsthand, both as a therapist and someone who's been in therapy for years, that relationships are one of the most, if not the most potent vehicles for healing and change. So I'm also always thinking about just showing up with curiosity, openness, and trying to set the foundation and build that kind of relationship with somebody. I think often that can lead into those other conversations about what was this, where did this start for you? What did drugs
Right.
or alcohol do for you? That those conditions of trust often need to be met first.
Yeah, they definitely need somewhere that they can have those conversations because I mean that opens up and allows you to have it off your chest for one, but then start unpacking and then start building your life back in place. And so I know therapy has been hugely impactful for me. Even though I've never gone through substance use, it's like I've been called a normie before by people that had substance use. We're like, oh, you never did that, so you're a normie, and I'm like, I can't really relate on that, in having that type of addiction. But like, yeah, I've been divorced. I lived in a very abusive household, and I've experienced things. I've lived life. You know what I mean? There's still things
Yeah,
for
yeah.
me to recover as well.
It's kind of a derogatory term. I'm not a fan of it. I mean, I get the distinction, but it's
Yeah.
yeah, normie or not, I feel like human suffering is universal, right?
Hmm.
And then I think when people call others normies, they're just saying you don't understand my experience.
Right.
Which, all
This is
right,
exclusive.
that's fair, but a normie has just as much a relationship with human suffering. Um, yeah.
What is the stigma like out there where you are when it comes to being in recovery or having a substance use issue in your past?
When you say out there, you mean like
In
this
your
side of the
area
country
where you
in
live? Yeah.
LA? Um, I think it varies. I think the stigma has decreased a lot, especially in California, especially in LA. There are a lot more liberally minded folks or like progressive folks who are thinking about addiction not as a moral failing, not as weakness, but as kind of the prevailing thing is viewing it as sickness that needs support and often viewing it as people being disconnected from resources and support. So they're leaning into substances. Harm reduction is really big out here. Um, and I think in general, like if you look at that kind of macro view, stigma has decreased a lot. I do think, and I've run into this with my work with clients and just in my personal life, that
Mhm.
I believe some level of stigma still exists, and people have a lot of thoughts and ideas about addiction, feelings about addiction. There's things that come to mind. Like you said, I think all of us have some kind of close contact with somebody that struggled with drugs or alcohol. Uh, Even if we think we don't, if we look through our relational histories, there's somebody in there. Um, and so, like, I think we're also all kind of affected by those relationships and how we come to view addiction or alcoholism. It also, I think, can be a reflection of what kind of personal work we've done. Like you said, you've been in therapy. I've been in therapy myself. And I think when there is that reflection, we can really unpack and dismantle some of the stigma around or challenge our own assumptions and preconceived ideas about addiction. Um, I'm getting a little lost in the sauce here. I tend to get philosophical. I hope that's
No,
okay.
this is good. This is where we
Um,
get the clips from.
yeah, but I think to your original question of the stigma piece, I think overall it's decreasing. I think there's still an ongoing thing where people have strong opinions about addiction, and that even if those opinions are less stigmatizing, like as they
Mhm.
were in maybe the 1930s, 40s, or 50s, I think those strong opinions and convictions can get us stuck in limited ways of thinking about what addiction is. Um, I'm also thinking, just as kind of a final point to add about stigma, you mentioned earlier about mm, being in recovery and being someone who acts as an example of this is what recovery can look like. I've made the decision to be very open about being in recovery. I don't always lead with that. I don't go to the coffee shop and order an Americano and be like, "Hey, I'm Jesse. I'm 8 years sober." Like, I'm
Right.
free. I've been sober since December 5th, 2016. I think it's important for people to know that it is possible to live a life in sobriety, um, and to show that you can have this kind of experience and be, I guess, I don't know, a moral person, an honorable person. You can be someone who's integrated and part of a community, um, and be an example of recovery.
Congratulations, almost 10 years now.
Yeah, it's that's kind of wild to think about. It feels, I mean, there was a time where like 10 hours was impossible. Yeah, so it's kind of wild to think about that. It is, there's a piece of it, as much as I've like learned about it and done this work, there's
Hmm.
a piece of it that remains kind of incomprehensible or ineffable. I don't know if we can fully understand all of the mechanisms of recovery.
Yeah, for sure. Uh, so something on the website that I really like. It was the bio about you and your page, and it says, "Let's work together to help you embrace your humanness."
Yeah.
And you're sort of taking people that are, they feel like they're lost or confused about their values, beliefs, or direction in life, and helping to empower them, which is incredible because I'm sure, yeah, I've experienced in my own self and just trying to relate. And this is why I like this, trying to find common ground, of, okay, what is it like for you? Because this is what it's like for me, type of situation, right? So for me, there are plenty of things in my life where I really, really, I regret that decision. You know what I mean? Or it weighs on me, and then you start devaluing yourself,
Mhm.
because of what happened, or a choice that you made, or something that happened to you, because, oh, it's because I'm this way, that's why it happened to me. That, and so then there's hopelessness in that, and then having to build yourself back up from that. Do you find it's a similar path when people are, trying to get their self confidence back? We're trying to evaluate and to put the foundation of who their identity is.
Absolutely. Yeah. I appreciate the way you're phrasing it and finding common ground. I think again how like suffering is a universal human condition, and what what maybe distinguishes addiction to substances from other kinds of suffering, I don't know. There are so many factors. It's so complex. You have genetics, you have exposure to drugs and alcohol at a young age, you have trauma, certain kinds of trauma, um, all sorts of factors that can contribute to people choosing drugs and alcohol as a way of
Right.
coping. But what I think when you look behind that, what is motivating the addiction is suffering. And so, like, we're often asking, like, we're trying to understand what is the addiction, and we're focusing on the addiction when I think there's a lot more transformation and change that can come from looking at what is the pain. Like, where did the pain come from? Not where did the addiction come from? The addiction came from the pain. And so, where did the pain come from? And that's the universal part. That's
Mm.
whether it's me or you. Like, I chose drugs and alcohol pretty early in life because they were very effective at making me feel like I was okay to be who I
Yeah.
was. I felt comfortable in my own skin. I felt like the world around me wasn't so heavy. I often described it as like, I felt like up until that point, the first time I got really drunk, I felt like I was carrying all this weight, like a backpack full of rocks on my back. And the first time I got drunk, it just all fell off. And it was such a powerful feeling. But I think people who don't use drugs and alcohol in that way have similar experiences, uh, other things that have helped them to cope. Um, and the piece that is universal is that most all of us have experienced some sort of suffering. And a lot of us have experienced what I'll call relational trauma, which is a broad category to talk about trauma. It's distinct from like shock trauma when we're thinking about PTSD, like war veterans or people who've witnessed extreme violence. Um, as opposed to shock trauma, relational trauma or complex trauma has to do with trauma, ongoing chronic experiences within our primary relationships and our family, usually, that created conditions that did not feel safe, where we didn't feel seen. And I'm not just talking like subjectively, like mom didn't look at me building my Legos, but like if you zoom out, a kid who's growing up in a family where they don't have attentive and attuned caregivers, that contributes to, there's a lot of research on this now, chronic dysregulation of the nervous system. And so when we have, I don't want to use too many big therapy words I don't want to sound too jargony, but basically like our body becomes on high alert. We're kind of always on the verge of going into fight or flight or freeze, or fart is the fourth F, for survival response. But these experiences kind of like set a lot of us up for different ways of coping to try and stay self-regulated. I think the more the discourse on addiction shifts to that and views it as a spectrum, views it as arising from sources of trauma, complex trauma, arising from lack of social supports, and how I think if we zoom out and look at like the sociocultural factors in our society, how many people are feeling it right now, how hard it is to make ends meet, how lonely and alienating and isolating our society makes a lot of people feel. We're not living in the best of times. I often will say, like when I'm talking with clients, if you're thriving right now, that makes me wonder, what does that say about you to be able to thrive in these kind of conditions? I don't know a lot of people who are thriving right now. It's really hard out there. And I say that just to really like normalize that. And like, that's something we're all up against. Again, a little tangential, so I'll stop. And
No, that's a great
yeah.
point. Yeah. I noticed one of the things, on the website, for where you're working at Kaiman, it's there's a big focus on, anti-racism commitment and land acknowledgement, and you yourself, it's listed right under your title about being a BIPOC therapist. And you're talking about, thriving in a time when it's not, it's not really a time where a lot of people were able to thrive, and how these things can hold you back. And so I'm curious, why is there a big focus on that?
On social justice, on identity.
Sure. On like why is it? I mean, obviously it's important enough to list, right, and to put it up front for the public. This is what you should know about us when you come to see us. Why? I assume it's because it's an invitation, but like no matter who you are, where you are, what you come from, like, and this is you're invited. Like you're gonna be invited here. You're gonna feel welcome whenever you come here. Just curious because I mean, it may be a common thing, in California. I've only been to LA one time. And it wasn't for very long, but I have lived in the Bible Belt for most of my life. And that is something that's just so like in Arkansas, the amount of organizations that are here, especially the ones that deal in recovery, um, most of the people, when you go in there, you'll see that 99% of the population of the clients are white, right? And that's not representative of the population. It's not representative of the people that are being incarcerated for drug possession or drug use. So there's a huge drop off, and there's like one or two organizations that like help the majority of people that are, if they're black. We don't have a whole lot of BIPOC here, but um, they don't really advertise it. You know what I mean? That's just it's just a known thing. Um, so yeah, I'm just curious, of why does it need to be a public facing thing? I think it's great. I just want to understand where the thought came from.
Yeah, I can't speak on behalf of my whole practice, but I'll speak to the extent that I can. That I guess I want to say that this is true for all of us, that we don't believe therapy is neutral. I don't think neutrality is possible in this world. Therapy is inherently political. And the reason that that's the case is I'd mentioned earlier talking about relational therapy. Uh, the most important part of therapy is building a relationship. If you build a relationship with a blank slate, an empty canvas, what kind of relationship is that? How healing can that be? If you're talking to a sounding board that sits there and nods for 50 minutes and says, "And how does that make you feel?" Um, that's not a real relationship. Um, to build a real relationship, you need two humans in the room. When you have two humans in the room, you have two histories, two complex configurations of identity, and we're all situated in this broader social web. And so I think our saying, and kind of like the way that we put it on our website and just the way we market ourselves as a practice, is making a statement that we don't believe therapy is neutral. We put our values forward, that we believe in equity, we believe in social justice. And I think you make a great point that historically, some resources are not tailored to the diversity that does exist among people who are trying to access those resources. That often you'll have this model that's imposed, like this is what therapy is, this is what substance abuse recovery is, and it's taking like a single, an overarching model and trying to give that to everyone. It's standardized. Without recognizing that there is an assumption in that this is going to work for everyone, and that often it's tailored to the dominant population, which tends to be white, tends to be cisgender, tends to be heterosexual, all these different aspects of identity. And another piece, I'm getting on another tangent here. I hope that's okay.
No, this is great. I love when people go on tangents.
Another piece that I feel like is really important here is like, if so much of recovery and healing and change is about connection and community, we really need to pay attention to those differences and uplift them. We can't just pretend that we're all the same. I mean, I love that spirit of seeking unity, but I think any unity that tries to bypass our differences is shallow. It's not real. It's homogenizing. It's saying we're all the same.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think saying these kinds of things in the current political climate can be divisive. I'm sure there are a variety of people who listen to your podcast. Some of them, I bet people on extremes of both sides might not like what I'm saying,
I'm
but
not about it.
yeah, I think it's really important to, if we're going to build relationships, to be able to feel like we can show up fully as ourselves. And that's why, coming back to your original question, like when I market myself or when our practice markets itself, we're making that statement loud and clear that we're not going to pretend that the things happening in our society don't matter. We're not going to
Right.
pretend that they don't affect you. That's actually a really important part of our work and the relationship that we build.
Yeah. No, that's a fantastic answer. So that's great. Yeah, I don't think that people realize that there's, when you say that there's resources for people that are available, because that's kind of the stance that a lot of people take whenever you don't have anyone in your life that's, addicted. When you see someone or hear someone about it, you're like, well, stop doing drugs. Just stop it. Quit. Just walk away from it. You don't have to do it.
Just say no, Nancy
Go through a
Reagan.
rehab, do a 12-step program for 30 days, and then you're good. You'll never think about it again.
Mm.
But that's not just not how it works. And I mean, it's been proven that that's not how it works. Maybe for a select few, it's enough. But like for the most part, like it is a full-on journey. And then that's why long-term recovery is a thing. That's why it's called that. And most of your life, you're going to be spending waking up every day, making a conscious decision. Today, I'm going to do something that's going to be a positive force in this world. You know what I mean? I'm not going to be what I did before. And I'm going to be this for my children, or I'm going to be this for, the work that I do, or I'm going to be this for myself. So it's really amazing. And yeah, people don't realize that there is a huge difference in between, like, depending on who you are, what resources are available. And there are, specific organizations that will set up to specifically help a certain, one, demographic of people. There will be others. I mean, I know on your coast, there are several rehabs that are like the upscale, rehabs where it is like you've got to have quite a lot of dollar signs in your bank account in order to even go there.
Vacation centers.
That's it. That's it. And there are others that are, free clinics that just set up in the middle of like some of the most, I would say war torn, but you know what I mean? It looks like the apocalypse in some of the areas of different cities. And we have those here in Little Rock as well. And, but somebody has a heart to help these people, and usually it's from people that have been there themselves. Maybe they were homeless, or maybe they had a substance use issue, and they want to help other people and give them free resources. And so it takes all of that. I think, I say all that to say that it takes a sort of a kind of a big tapestry. You know what I mean? And it's like these are all just threads that make it together. And that's kind of what we need in order to address recovery. So, from your stance and what you're doing in helping build people up psychologically of you do have value, this is what you do, and this is how we're going to work together to establish a relationship to build out your identity. I think that's incredible, and I think it's a huge step that a lot of organizations are missing, particularly I would say the ones that are just focused on 12 steps, or just serving a higher power, or the main focus is never just, look, let's start with you. And there are some organizations that do it really great, and there are some that I've seen that are just highly focused on the religious portion, or there's plenty of others that are just like halfway houses and things like that are just getting getting funding, and so that's what they're running you through like cattle. So I guess for the average person, or for anybody that is in that same position that comes to you, whether they have substance use or not, well, how do you get started on that path of finding your identity?
That's a great question. I want to respond to that, and I also want to talk a little bit about this other piece that you're bringing up, which is how I think recovery from addiction is, there are all these different models for understanding what addiction is and what recovery is.
Right.
And I think all of them have benefits and strengths and things that we can draw from, but they also all have their limitations. Thinking of 12-step in particular, I love 12-step. It's been effective for so many people. It's a recovery model that has changed a lot of lives, has changed families' lives. And at the same time, you pose the question of like centering identity and really building a more authentic or like whole relationship with yourself and how you relate with others. In 12-step, you are the problem. We need to get self out of the way and get you to God, which I think for some people, it fits within their belief system. It can be such a powerful and transformative vehicle. And if you really look at 12-step, the stuff that it is helping people to do is really about shifting moral character and how we live our lives. And that's such a powerful thing for people in recovery. That is in a way like laying the foundation for a sustainable life in sobriety. Because like you said, it's not just about stopping. It's about staying stopped. So many of us had that problem of getting sober for a period of time and then relapsing. So if I'm coming back to your question about identity and getting curious about ourselves, I think there are a lot of ways to approach that. I guess the first place my mind goes is just making space and like making room for all of the parts of you and all of your identities. When we think about what are you needing to build a life that feels meaningful, that feels solid or stable enough, where you no longer feel like you need that thing that you once sought to make you feel like things were okay. And I think our identities do affect that. I think things like race, gender, sexuality, all affect how we experience safety, how we experience connection. Our environment and the context around us affects how we experience connection and being able to express ourselves authentically. So if we're in therapy and I'm doing this work with an individual, I try to just remain as curious as I can. Again, building those conditions of trust and like mutual vulnerability. I think so much of it is actually, I'm not going to necessarily tell one of my clients my whole life story, but it's so important that I show up as a full human, which means that I show up vulnerably. If I'm feeling nervous in our first session, which I often do, I'll name it. I'll ask people how they're feeling. A lot of them will say they feel nervous and excited. I think it's important for me to say that I feel nervous too, if I feel nervous. I think it's important for me to reflect like how the way that they're showing up impacts me. And like to be very open about some of my own identities and for us to be able to have those conversations about how we're affecting each other, how we're impacting each other in the moment. Um, and so, again, I feel like my answer is getting a little tangential, but
That's
uh,
good.
it's for me, it's about mm, being curious, being vulnerable, being attuned, and meeting someone where they're at, rather than and resisting the temptation to like analyze and interpret and fit what somebody's saying or what they're bringing to the table into some model or understanding of addiction or mental health that I might have, but to really be curious and meet someone where they're at.
Mm. Yeah, for
Which
sure.
kind of feels like a lost art. I don't know if you feel this way, but like just in human relationships, it feels like so many of us are could use a lot more curiosity and openness
Hmm.
to one another. I think when we get fearful, we become a lot more judgmental. We are on high alert. We get less curious. We're looking for problems. We're looking for things to like poke holes in. We're looking to
Hmm.
defend our position. And that makes it really hard to connect with people.
No, you're absolutely right. And I know that, a lot of people will point at COVID as part of that recent, the phenomena of, anti or asocial behavior, where, we were, quarantined and people got used to that and then having to go back into like I used to go to these networking meetings all the time, at chambers of commerce and things like that. And then when COVID happened, there was months where we couldn't have any meetings, and it was driving me crazy because I love to get out of the house and go do something, and so I had to go just climb climb a mountain or something. But then whenever we were allowed to start having these meetings again, it's like people forgot how to even have a conversation with another human being, that
Mm.
didn't live with them. And it was like, wow, you got really awkward. You got awkward when during this downtime. So yeah, and I think we're still sort of recovering from that, but we also live in times where it's like you said, it's kind of hard to make those, connections together. I mean, from so many different angles. I mean, there's online communities as well. I mean, I'm sure if you've perused X at any point in time, like you see, it's just that's constantly what that is. That's what we were talking about, like where we're constantly just trying to poke holes or trying to have a negative take on just whatever it is posted. It doesn't even matter if it's a if it really matters or changes anything in the world or your life, but you're just constantly trying to do that. And so, um, no, I appreciate that. I appreciate your answer there. If one of the things I always ask, guests at the end of the show, because I love to know, based on your personal experience and your professional life, and which the work that you're doing with other people, going back to that version of Jesse before he started this career, right? Um, so there's a lot of probably looking for your own identity at the time as well. And so a lot of the things that you're working with your current clients with, it's informed by your own personal experience, like you said. Knowing that, what do you think is a long-term solution for somebody who is in that same position as you were back then when you were first getting started?
Mm, that's a great question. Maybe a good place to start is to kind of, in a general way, talk about what that process was like for me and move into like how that I think can apply to other people. And I think back to when I first got sober. This was in 2016. I had been in and out of rehabs for years. I think the first time that I checked into a rehab was 2011. And then for the next 5 years, I was in and out of rehabs and struggling to stay sober. I would get a few months here, a few months there. And the longest period of sobriety I had was a year and a half. And then I suffered a really gnarly relapse that lasted for about 8 months. Um, and during that time, um, I I really lost it. I lost the will to live. I thought I had lost my mind. I felt like when I tried getting sober, I would never be able to come back. I was in the detox in the hospital at Glendale Adventist and reading Nietzsche to the doctors that came in. There were some medical students that they thought I was, I don't know, they must have thought I was funny or something, because one of the doctors brought like 5 medical students in to look at me. And I was like, what the fuck are y'all looking at? Um, um, but I just think of like how I look at that guy, and there's a part of me that's like, damn, that was pitiful. And there's another part of me that's like, I really feel bad for that guy.
Hmm.
He was like really, really scared and hurt and didn't know what the fuck was wrong. And
Yeah.
he always felt like there was something wrong with him and he didn't know what. And I think the often, like before we get to the sustainable change, there's so many different versions of this, but I think people have to reach a point of, I call it surrender. It may not have to be total surrender, just maybe even like a crack in the door, the slightest openness to change your mind or start to think differently about things, can lead to that foundation, where really the foundation is just stop fucking drinking and just stop using drugs. Over time, I think it became really important to uh, change the way that you're living, to be more accountable, uh, to just be able to function and exist in our society. But on a deeper level, what really I think gave me the ability to now stay sober one day at a time is having the courage to continue to look deeper at that question that I posed earlier, which I heard this originally from like Gabor Mate of like, it's not, instead of asking like uh, why the addiction, we need to ask why the pain, because the pain is driving the addiction, and getting really curious about my own pain and those things that had been nagging and following me through my whole life, even before the drinking and using. And that remained after I stopped drinking and using. There's a term that you hear in recovery of like a dry drunk, someone who stops drinking and using drugs but remains a miserable fuck. And I hope it's okay to curse.
No, you're good. Yeah.
Okay. um, but remains miserable and doesn't experience any kind of fundamental change. And I think that has to do with being too afraid to face our pain. And so building that foundation, I think, is about getting curious and facing our pain. What I found is that so much of that pain is relational. So much of our identities, I think, are relational. So much of who we are, we come to know through our relationships. And so a lot of healing is also about finding community. It's about building deeper, more authentic, more meaningful relationships. It's about being seen and being held. It's about showing up fully as yourself and someone actually saying, you know what, that's okay. I don't see anything wrong with you. You just being you. Um, and to have that experience, I think that old pain starts to, it doesn't, never goes away. I think that's part of healing, is that some of these wounds are deeply embedded in us, but that we come into a new relationship with those hurt or wounded parts of ourselves. And that's what healing looks like, is despite my pain, despite my experience, I can show up in a different way. I've learned to be vulnerable. I think vulnerability is courageous. It's not a weakness. Um, and I think that's such an important part of healing. Um, I think something else I would just like to add to that is that relationships and community, like not just in the way they impact us as individuals, but uh, we can't exist on our own. I think when we try to, when we do withdraw and kind of operate under that belief that we're totally alone in this world, even if maybe we are in an existential way, like we need to seek connection and community. Uh, I don't know if we need to. I think without connection and community, uh, any kind of journey or process of healing that we engage in will be limited. In that, again, I think relationships are the most potent vehicle for healing. Often it takes someone else loving me for me to love myself, for me to believe in myself. It takes someone believing in me. Uh, and without that, I think we're limited. So I don't know. That's kind of a convoluted answer to your question, but I think at the core of sustainable recovery is connection, community, and a deeper process of healing that is much bigger than just stopping drinking and using drugs, but starting to feel comfortable in your own skin, starting to feel like you do belong in the world. And I think that's also something that we all kind of seek as humans, as we were talking about earlier. It's not just people stopping using drinking and drugs. So many people, I think, feel some version of that disconnection, separation, um, sickness of the soul or the heart or whatever you call it. Um, and we live in a social environment that I think is very conducive, or it creates those feelings of alienation, disconnection. That's no mistake. That's food for the advertising industry. Buy this car, buy this electronic, buy this. It'll make you feel better. So many of us feel some version of that. And I think that I would like for whoever I'm working with or whoever's in my life, I think we help each other. We're walking alongside each other. I reach out my hand, grab your hand, I help you, and you help me. Uh, and we're not alone.
100% agree. That was a great answer. I was asked that at the end, and it kind it does throw people off because you don't have a prepared statement. And I'm a big believer in tacit knowledge, like we were talking about before, where the
Yeah, yeah.
things that you deal with every day, like you've accumulated this amount of knowledge and practical, expertise and experience, to where it all kind of comes out when I ask that question. And so these are things that are based on your personal experience. And yes, these are yeah, I resonate with all of it. Absolutely, 100%. It does take all of us to be able to work together and to, find your own personal identity as a human being, but don't hinder somebody else because they're also being an identity, they're also being their own individual. Because it can be alienating, like you said, when you pick, certain traits and be like, I am this, like by nature, you were kind of alienating yourself from the thing that is the opposite of that. But we've taught to be so separated that it's like we cannot work together with these people because we're not like them. That doesn't make sense, And so much healthier as a community, as a society, as just human beings. Whenever we can work with people that are not like yourself, imagine that. Very simple concept, but one that has to be repeated constantly. It seems like.
Yeah.
Uh, Jesse, if people wanted to know more about you, your services, where would they go?
They could go to kindman.co, that's CO. That's the website for the private practice where I work. We're a group practice in Highland Park. We work in person with people in Los Angeles and offer telehealth for anyone who lives in California. If people are just interested in getting in touch with me, they can find my bio on our page and reach out that way. Yeah.
Incredible. Thank you for sharing your experience and for being willing to come on and talk about that and about what you've observed and to have these conversations and open it up and sort of dispel some of the stigma at least a little bit.
Yeah. Thanks so much for having me, Ty. It's a privilege to be able to do this. Thank you.
No problem at all. Yeah, it's definitely my pleasure. And if you are listening to this as an audio podcast, you can find us on YouTube. Search for Long Term a Podcast in Recovery and vice versa. If you're watching this on YouTube, you can find us on any of the podcast platforms from iHeart to Apple Podcast to Amazon Music and wherever you find your podcast, that's where we are. The biggest thing that we always ask is that, we love the subscriptions, we love the follows and the comments and ratings. There's so many different ways to engage with the content, but the most impactful and the most important thing is that you share this episode with someone who needs to hear the information that we've talked about here. If you've heard Jesse talk about some of the things here about, especially about finding your identity and about, the tapestry of what we're trying to create here of a support system and the needs of having a healthy mindset, share this episode with somebody. I'm sure you've thought somebody needs to hear this. Share this episode with them. The worst that can happen is they don't listen to it. The best that can happen is that it saves a life. And so it's that easy. And we really appreciate you for being here each and every episode, listening and learning along with us as we are still searching about what works, what resources are available, and how do we make it all work together for a sustainable future in recovery. And we will see you in the next episode. All right, I'm gonna hit stop.